Our context and environment is more dynamic than ever today. NHRDN brings to you a discourse on global and local economic trends and challenges with Ms. Swati Rustagi in discussion with our guest speaker for the session, Dr. Ajit Ranade. Ms. Swati Rustagi is the Director, Diversity, Equity and Inclusion, International Markets, Worldwide Consumer. She is responsible for leading Amazon's vision for equal work opportunity for all across consumer, operations, CS, and corporate teams outside of NA. Ms. Swati has previously held leadership positions at HUL, DSP Merrill Lynch, and Max Healthcare. I now request Ms. Swati to please introduce Dr. Ajit Ranade and take forward the session. Over to you, Ms. Swati.
Thank you so much, Ipshit. It's my awesome pleasure and great honor to have Dr. Ajit Ranade with us. Dr. Ajit Ranade is the Vice Chancellor of Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics, one of the most revered institutions in the country. He was till recently, he was the chief economist for the Aditya Birla Group, a leading Indian multinational conglomerate. He's someone who has been the co-founder and trustee for the Association of Democratic Reform. He's the founder for the Pune International Center. He's a renowned author and has recently written an award-winning book on rising to the challenge of China. He's written multiple write-ups around in the financial press around economic policy. His academics are kind of things which just make me look up with awe. He is an alumni of Electrical Engineering BTech IIT Mumbai, followed by IIM Ahmedabad, and a PhD from Brown University. But what struck me most amongst all of this was his Joy the Veer. He was amazing when he shared with me that he was one of the expert panelists in the first 3 seasons of KBC, and people could call into him to check in for their answers. He's also someone who truly believes that work and life is an integral, harmonious relationship. You love what you do and you do what you love. And that's the work-life balance that he prescribes. So over to you, Dr. Ajit Ranade. Really looking forward to listening to you today and listening to our audience questions on how do you see the economic trends, both global and local, impacting our profession. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Swati. Thank you for such a kind and generous introduction. I'm really privileged. Thank you for inviting me, and thanks to the organizers, the National Human Resources Network. I'm really privileged to be here. And I just want to repeat that message which Swati has left for all of us. It's very important. Very few of us are privileged because we can do what we love. And the rest of us have to love what we do. But both are equivalent. We have to understand this basic maxim that it doesn't really matter. Eventually, you can be privileged and you do what you love, and you can love what you do. Anyway, that's the sort of. But let me get to the theme of today's interaction. What I'm going to do is just briefly talk about the economic context in the world or in India, and then I'm going to have a conversation with Swati. So very quickly, the global context is somewhat strange. I'm talking about the economic context, that actually 2 of the largest economies in the world, which is USA and China, which together account for something like 40% of global GDP, 40 or maybe very high. These 2 economies are booming. There's no other word for it, because they are growing at 5% GDP growth. That's the expected growth rate during 2022. And that is like, by comparison, since they are 10 times bigger than India, it's like India's GDP growing at 50% annually. So there is no other word, if these economies are growing at around 5%, for maybe higher in the case of China, then it's really a boom time for the global economy. Not only that, some of the other large economies like Germany is also doing well, European Union. So this is the context. And why is that happening? First, number one reason is that there's been a lot of fiscal stimulus because of the pandemic. Number 2 is that there is vaccine optimism. Of course, the US has been affected by the Omicron wave much more than other countries. And therefore, this 3rd wave or 4th wave, whatever you call it. But all the mandates are off. In the UK, for example, its life back to normal. It seems a little somewhat reckless. I guess some people who are very risk averse might think, is it too soon? But I think that's what policymakers are doing. So that's the second reason: fiscal stimulus, vaccine optimism. There's a lot of monetary stimulus as well. But more importantly, there's a demand revival, after nearly 2 years of pandemic, and there's a demand revival. So we are seeing the boom time is because of all that. And one of the manifestation of that in the US, we have a phenomenon, what they are calling the Great Resignation, meaning people are resigning. What that means is actually that since April, I think, or since March of last year, almost every month, 4 million Americans are leaving their jobs. So this still needs to be understood. Of course, they're leaving their jobs, but they're probably taking up new jobs. But we have a situation that until recently, the United States economy, the largest in the world, has 10 million unfilled vacancies. For a workforce which is the size is, I guess the size of the workforce is probably around 200 million or something, but 10 million is not a small number, unfilled vacancies. We are hearing stories like you're getting joining bonuses for professions like plumbers and electricians, or unheard of. I think that's and then the other thing that's going on alongside this low unemployment rate is inflation, high inflation. The United States for the last few months actually has higher inflation than India, which is really quite unprecedented. That US having 7% inflation and India having 6%. It's usually ulta. That is, India's inflation rate typically tends to be 5, 6, 7%, and the US inflation used to be 2% or less. In fact, in countries like Japan and all, it's 0% inflation, or even negative sometimes. But we are seeing inflationary tendencies also in the developed world, which again is the same phenomenon. That is it boom time? So this is one thing that's going on. I mean, I will come to India shortly. The other thing that's happening, and it's in the near term, is the geopolitical flashpoints, if I can call them. Ukraine is a flashpoint, perhaps Taiwan is a flashpoint. And even as we speak right now, I don't know how it's going to play out. Is Russia looking for a confrontation, or is it a shadow boxing, shadow confrontation for some other considerations? This is not a session to discuss geopolitics, and especially for a country like India, it is putting us in a very strange situation that on one hand, we have formed a sort of the coordination group called the Quad, QUAD. It consists of USA, Japan, India, and I guess UK. I'm trying to think. But so therefore, the proximity, the affinity for India towards the US is strong. And in fact, US is a very big trading partner for India, very big source of FDI. And it is one of the few countries, or probably the only country, where India enjoys a substantial export surplus. We have a surplus of $30 billion. So obviously, and ever since the 2006 Indo-US civil nuclear deal was signed, there's been an increasing engagement. On the other hand, Russia is also an old friend in the sense of, especially from our defense preparedness. I believe something like 80%, if not new equipment, but at least maintenance, supplies, and equipment we still depend on Russia. And Russia has helped us in the past in critical veto support at the United Nations Security Council. So I don't know how India is going to, what position India is going to take. So this geopolitics is the other part of the economic context, and that is causing some anxiety, some uncertainty. There is a technical word in economics called risk off. Suddenly, investors don't want to take any risks, so they will stay hunkered down. They will wait for this geopolitical situation to be some clarity. So therefore, the money will go to safe assets, and the money will be invested in US government bonds or in gold or something like that. Therefore, gold prices will go up. So, but I think, I don't know whether this Ukraine flashpoint is going to be affecting the whole world, but certainly it's in the news. So beyond that, if you come to India, incidentally, there's resurgence in East Asian economies also. As you know, the center of gravity of the economic center of gravity of the world is increasingly shifting to the east, if not already there. And we recently had the final kickoff of this trade bloc of 15 countries called Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP. It has 15 countries, which includes the 10 countries of ASEAN, the ASEAN ASEAN region, which includes Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, and so on. And in addition, there are 5 other countries, that is China, Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. And there was supposed to be a 16th country, which was supposed to join this trading bloc, that is India. And together, this bloc would have been perhaps 40-50% of global GDP, even though it doesn't include Europe or North America or South America. And it represents a population of, I don't know, 3 billion. But India decided to walk out abruptly on the 5th of November, 2019. And after 8 years of deliberations, after 8 years of negotiations, and after 8 years of active leadership and enthusiasm. So that is another topic for discussion, whether India is suddenly turning protectionist, or are we afraid of the Chinese domination of this trade bloc, or are we trying to be defensive about Chinese imports? And not to speak of the big event that happened in the summer of 2020, in the middle of the pandemic in Ladakh, and this whole India-China relationship. On India's economy, the fact is that the GDP contraction during 2021 was significant. It was a -7, -8%. So India had one of the biggest contraction in the world. Actually, China had a positive growth rate even during the pandemic year. But India and UK had the biggest contraction, right? 7-8% contraction. So 21-22, we are seeing a revival. We'll probably see 10% growth this year. The 21-22 year is going to end in a month's time. 22-23 also, I think we are seeing a good growth prospect. We will probably see about 6% real GDP growth. And with inflation adjustment, if you add inflation, it'll be about 10-11%, I think. And the budget, which was presented on the 1st of February, is sending those signals. That is, it is proposing a modest increase in government spending, but it has all that extra spending is going into capital items. So we are going to see capex-driven growth, not just from the public sector, but also the private sector. And if indeed the world economy is booming, as I said in the beginning, then India should take advantage in terms of exports. This year, 2021-22, our exports are going to touch nearly $400 billion, manufacturing exports. That is excluding IT, software and services. 400 billion is almost something like 40% more than last year. And 400 billion is something we have never achieved. So it's going to be a record. And if we can maintain that pace for the next couple of years, then that will be a very big driver of growth, because exports are very closely linked with the manufacturing. Exports are very closely linked with micro, small, and medium enterprises. Exports also contribute to employment creation in India. So if we can take advantage of that, it remains to be seen. If the global economy is doing well, we should be able to do that. And also, the fact is that we have got these schemes called PLI, that is production-linked incentives, which are supposed to actually help exporting businesses. They are supposed to contribute, meaning they provide policy support, they provide an incentive to achieve scale. A large-scale manufacturing. Production-linked incentives means if you increase production levels, then you get incentive payments from the government. And if you achieve scale, all of that stuff is not going to be sold in India. It's going to be sold. It's going to be sold globally. So that means you have to. The success of PLI will depend on achieving success in exports. So I'm hoping not just investments, but exports will be a significant driver of growth. So having said that, and then we can talk about what is the inflation outlook, what is the outlook for impact of oil prices, what are the vulnerabilities, what is exchange rate going to be. But instead of going all into the technical details, I want to just quickly conclude this section of my comments with some of the fault lines or some of the very serious issues that we need to address. Number one, the biggest issue is that from the point of view of employment, we still have 55% of the workforce connected, or 55% of the population connected directly or indirectly with agriculture, which accounts for only 14% of national income. This is a very big, the sort of very big challenge. After 75 years of independence, why is it that 55% of the population is still dependent on agriculture directly or indirectly? Second point is that we job creation record. We, as you know, you people are HR professionals. India produces something like 20 million, close to 20 million people who reach the age of 18 every year. These are new voters, but more importantly, they are going to enter the workforce. Out of that, maybe half of them will work, or 2/3 will work. We are not able to generate 12 million, 13 million jobs every year. So how do we do that? Let's not call it jobs, we can call it livelihoods. That is another challenge. Of course, not to deny that India is rapidly aging. Half of India's states have reached a fertility rate of less than 2.1. That means fertility rate is the average number of children that a woman of childbearing age will have. If a husband and wife or a couple produces 2 children, so then it's called a replacement rate. 2 people replaced by 2 children. But since infants die, some infants die, you need to have it at 2.1. So 2.1 is called the replacement rate. Many states in India are actually below 2.1, but some states are way above 2.1. So I think the jobs challenge is the second one. The third one, let me just flag it, is the fact that female participation in the labor force. How many women are in a paid job today? The shocking number is only 1 in 5. Only 1 in 5 women who are of working age are actually getting paid or are in the workforce formally. That means either they are looking for a job or they're getting paid. 4/5, 80% is outside the workforce. I mean, this is a huge national asset, which is if it's lying idle, that's a huge national waste. But I think so. From an employment perspective, I think these 3 are the big headlines that I want to flag. And last point is, of course, the huge mismatch. I remember a few years ago hearing the chairman of L&T saying, L&T is trying to expand, but we can't find electricians, we can't find plumbers, we can't find technical workers. And at the same time, you have a huge supply of labor. I was told a few weeks ago there was a job advertisement in the state of Uttar Pradesh, a couple of hundred jobs and 1 crore applicants. So the simultaneous coexistence of shortage of talent, shortage of skills, and shortage of people, and then again shortage of jobs. So I'll stop here, and maybe Swati, I'll go back to you, then we can go into the conversation. Lots to talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think really interesting things to think about. And I want to start off with something you said early on in your conversation about the Great Resignation. And we see parts of it playing out in India, and corporate India has been under pressure as well. Given the fact that we have had a contracted GDP, given the fact that small businesses, especially in the last 2 years, have been under a lot of pressure financially, and we see the kind of change in compensation benchmarks, given what's happening in the US and therefore the flow through in India. How do you see it playing out for us over the next 1 year? And what's your advice to HR professionals out there? How fast should we react or wait it out?
So I think I don't think the Great Resignation phenomenon, the way it is manifested in the US, is the same for India. I don't think so. The US phenomenon is still being, analyzed and understood. Some people think it is also a consequence of the fact that there is a fairly liberal cash support policy. That is, people were getting, I think, checks of $1,200 or something like that for some time anyway, and the unemployment benefits were increased. So that causes a slight disincentive to look for jobs, because at least for some time you can tide over. That may be one reason. The second reason is that people have found that if you can work from home, why commute? The Americans are in fact one of the worst examples of commuting time. That's the classic American dream is to own a home, but the homes are affordable only at farther and farther away from the central business district of the cities. So it's a constant race between affordability and commuting time. So people actually, and owning a home is that American dream. So renting is not the American dream. So people live far, they commute 4 hours a day. And then at some point during the pandemic, they must have thought, wait a minute, we can work from home, so why do we? So there may be various factors. I don't think that the same is true for India. It is true that we had this massive exodus, migration of reverse migration to the villages during the lockdown. And it is true that there are some instances now that people in villages perhaps have found some occupation with lower incomes, but they feel that their quality of life is better. So it's going to take much more to induce them to come back to their workplace. And therefore, you have to offer higher wages or higher increments. That is the blue-collar workers. As far as the higher talented pool is concerned, that I made a reference to that. This dichotomy of shortage of skills and shortage of people is something we have to face. So as HR professionals, don't be surprised that for your talent pool, you'll have to give really hefty increases for not only for recruiting but for retaining your talent, because there is shortage, acute scarcity of talent, and then there's a mismatch, between the skills, the qualifications that are coming out of universities, and I'm in the university now, so I should be also held guilty for this. That what's coming out of the university or skilling or the technical institutes and what the industry demands. The curriculum is not up to date. In fact, we should not have a curriculum forget about yesterday's needs, but not even today's needs. The curriculum should cater to tomorrow's needs. So we should be teaching in universities and training institutes stuff which is actually about labor skills required tomorrow, not even today.
Right. Thank you for that. I think that's really useful, and I'm sure you're going to get quoted a lot in boardrooms around India in the next day or two about why increases need to be hefty. So thanks for adding to our arguments. You made a very interesting point about national asset being utilized, and you spoke specifically of women. You spoke specifically of women, and how do you see this panning out in India? Whether it's women, whether it's persons with disability, we do see a very low rate of employment even today. And given the kind of pressures as a nation that we are facing with contracted GDPs, with deficits, how do you see this panning out? And what do you see as role of HR professionals and corporates to make this change happen?
First of all, I want to clarify that I don't want to refer to the women portion of the workforce as only assets. There's great dignity also of work. There's self-respect, there's confidence, there's other sociological and cultural factors involved when a woman starts working. So it's not only to be seen as, so that's important. And incidentally, it wasn't always like this. The women's participation rate used to be around 32% 10, 12 years ago. Or 15. It's come down sharply from 32 to 22 or 20% now. And during the pandemic, it fell even further. So that is a huge concern, because we are now at a scale, percentage rate, which is probably below Saudi Arabia. See, Saudi Arabia is a place where women actually get good education, but they're not part of the workforce. I mean, until recently, women were not even allowed to drive a car. So that's a different example. I don't want to use that as a benchmark, but why can't we have 40% of the women in the workforce? When I say workforce, it includes both employed and unemployed, but looking for work. So I think we have to make a conscious effort to, and incidentally, from the case of Japan, I know, and perhaps it's applicable to other countries, including India, that when a woman enters the workforce, typically after her education, and when a woman gets married, and when they have a child, then during the maternity leave, it used to be that almost 60 to 70% of the women just drop off after the first child is born. And I mean, that means the probability of such a person returning to work, unless there are very conscious policies from HR point of view, is very low. 70% of the women who have their child don't come back. That used to be the case. So I think that's where I can give you the stark example is that in most medical colleges in India, almost more than 50% of the entering class is women, girls. More than 50%. Girls outnumber boys in medical schools. So, and guess how many practicing doctors are there? Women. It's, I think, not even 15%. Of course, there's a historical reason for this, but, so where these women doctors are lost to the country if they're not practicing. That's a huge loss to society. So how can you make, I mean, often it's because the woman either chooses to have a family or it goes into some other profession, maybe as a medical administrator, not as a practicing doctor. So this needs a focus. I mean, I don't think it's only HR professional. This needs a policy focus at the highest levels, at the national policy making level. So what Japan did is that one of the reasons women didn't come back is because they did not trust the creches. See, it's one thing to say that why don't you leave your child in a creche, but so Japan actually very actively promoted publicly funded creches, probably 500,000 of them. This and funded by the government and with audited for very high quality. I think that made a difference. So, I mean, this is just one example. I'm sure there are multiple instruments to tackle this problem. But this is a huge challenge. I think India has to find a way to increase this women's participation in the labor force from 20 to back to 30, if not higher.
Awesome. And thank you for bringing in that perspective. I'm seeing a lot of comments on the side, which are really appreciative of the perspective you're bringing in. So thank you for bringing that. There's a lot of interest in your comments on reskilling and on relooking at curriculum for the future. Would you like to elaborate a little more on that? There seems to be tremendous interest on that, saying, how do you see the curriculum of the future being designed?
I mean, just to give you an example, Swati, that a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, I'd looked at the curriculum which was taught in Mumbai University School. And this was a time when the airline industry was booming. After 2006 or 7, I think airlines just took off. Indigo, SpiceJet, Air Deccan, remember? And there was a huge shortage of airline skills. I mean, not just pilots or ground engineers. And I was trying to find, is there any single school which offered, like airline economics or technical training related to the airline industry? Zero. And this was contemporary, like I said. So what are the universities doing? Why are they not looking at what's happening? And the airline today, I think the airline industry, forget about the pandemic, because the pandemic has affected tourism, hotels, airlines. So don't take the pandemic as an example or a benchmark, but if we know that, we had the blue skies policy, we opened up, now Air India has been taken over by Tatas, but why are we are importing pilots? It was often common to see on an Indigo flight, somebody from Hungary or some Australian pilot with an Australian accent. I have nothing against them, but why can't we have more Indian pilots? And then not enough training centers. You either go to Hyderabad or you go to Texas or Florida. So that's just one example. So I think, when I said being ready for the future, there are it's just, I'm sure there are dozens and dozens of such areas one can identify. For example, the big driver of growth in the future, in the next 10 years, is going to be digital and renewable energy. So I was just thinking that we are a country blessed with sunshine for 350 days of the year. So we should just be, the entire northern belt, especially the tourism of Uttarakhand or Himachal, or should be just dotted with all hotels. We should not use anything but solar. But it requires entire skilling industry where you fabricate customized fabrication. It's not like you can't just buy it from Amazon. I think so the entire service industry can come up which customizes and fabricates, and because everything is uneven, right? So some are big hotels, some are small hotels, some are just mom and pop. There's a huge opportunity there. But are we producing such graduates who can do give customized services for this solar? And one could go on and on. App developers, a very huge shortage of. I think time is short, and maybe I have not thought deeply enough. But I just feel that we need curriculum reform for sure.
Right. There was an interesting piece on the chat which caught my eye, which talked about specifically on psychology and the syllabus across management institutions on psychology and emotional well-being and mindfulness as we build future leaders. And any thoughts you have in that space, and how do you see that space really developing for India?
So as far as the university is concerned, one of the priorities I have here is that, instead of calling it mental health, it's better to call it mental, wellness. See, when I wear specs, there's no stigma attached to it, right? So basically, it's if you can't read, then people wear specs. So specs is not seen as a sign of disability. There's nothing to be ashamed of. So we have to attain that level of social acceptance of other disabilities. If somebody comes into a room with a walking, on a crutches or in a wheelchair, it should be like somebody is wearing specs. I'm talking about mindsets, and the same thing is true for mental well-being. People go and do yoga or do to reduce their blood pressure and all. That is all seen as great. This is same thing about mental. To go to take help for counseling and having mental balance and well-being is the same way. We have to accept it as society. So I'm hoping that in our campuses, by the way, many students across many colleges, engineering and medicine and even others, there's a problem of student suicides. That's the tip of the iceberg, right? For every one suicide, there are 100 cases of people who are extremely struck by anxiety and depression. And for every 100 such, there are 1,000 others who are facing. So we need to, in fact, I think, have this as mainstream activity that help counseling. And going to a counseling again should not be stigma. I heard about an example where there was a student, I won't name them, but so clearly clinically depressed, so want to go to we want to arrange something. So the parents said, no, please don't, then people will come to know, then we will have trouble getting him married. So please hide this fact. Either don't go to the. So there's so many changes required at so many levels. At the technical level, at the mindset level, sociological, social attitude level. But I think it's very important. Incidentally, just to put one more point here, is that I believe it's not just about taking care of psychological needs and psychological well-being, but also in universities and schools, value-based education, values. This is not something that economists talk about, that values are not taught, but they are caught. The first, we actually learn our values from our parents. So that's the first place, but of course, from our teachers as well. And we used to, I don't know, Swati, in your school, we used to have a subject called moral science, which was either very boring or just a time pass. But I don't want to belittle that. But basically, when you said psychological well-being, it also struck me that values-based education. I feel, for example, our curriculum should include the lives and teachings of great teachers of India, great saints, prophets, but then our country is famous for mixing religion and politics, so that's always a very dangerous minefield. But I really feel there's a place for this.
Thank you for sharing that. When you said that, I have young kids in school, and I'm really impressed with their curriculum, because they, I was attending their one of their online classes and just sitting around and listening to it. And they were actually talking to them about stuff like, okay, why do you feel angry? How do you know you're feeling angry? What do you do when you're angry? And these are 7-year-olds, right? And I was like, I wish somebody had done that with me early on. I think the opportunity for education to do that early on and to normalize emotions in a way that we can deal with it is, it's really
very scientific. It's very scientific, anger management, because anger, as they say, you desire something, and then if something is denied to you, if you get denied, it's your desire is thwarted. So that leads to first leads to anger maybe, but anger leads to delusion, and they say delusion leads to your mental faculty becomes clouded. Then you make wrong decisions, and then that's kind of the road to eventual downfall. So it's a very scientific thing. Anger management is very scientific. Awesome. It's not just wishy-washy emotion. So one should mainstream these things. Actually, it's great that your schools also are, your kids are, that's wonderful.
You referred early on in your conversation about geopolitical impact on economy and therefore on workplaces. Over the last year and a half, and especially since George Floyd, we've seen a lot of impact on anything that happens, which is geopolitical, social, catching the attention more internationally. So it may be different issues, whether it's Asian hate crimes, whether it is different kinds of issues. How do you see that playing up for India and for our profession in human resources?
As far as the point that I referred to was the Ukraine situation.
Yes.
But like I said, India is kind of distant from there, but we have to take a stand. Are we on the American side or on the Russian side? And it's going to be difficult. It's a dilemma. Perhaps we have to balance it out. And the one thing that will impact the Ukraine situation will impact, as I said, investor anxiety and investor risk off, but also global oil prices. And India is very vulnerable. If there's one thing that India is vulnerable because we don't produce oil, we have to import oil. If oil prices go to $100, and stay there, it affects us in 3 or 4 ways badly. One is that our current account deficit will go up, our exchange rate will deteriorate, our inflation rate will go up, and the fiscal subsidy, because a lot of subsidy goes into cooking gas and fertilizer, which is derived from oil, that will go up. So it is something we need to watch out for. But I think what you're referring to in a very polite way is like things like the hijab controversy. I think we should just should have just said it, that in our context it's not geopolitics, it's just politics. And I mean, I'm concerned that these kind of things are hogging the headlines, and it's completely I would say a debate which is hijacked, and it is contrary to liberal principles. I feel it's like Mr. Bush when he said Bush doctrine: are you with us or against us? It's like that, are you for hijab or against hijab? And then liberals, it's like the liberals are supposed to be caught. Arey pakda gaya. Because if you're liberal, of course you'll say no, I'm not from hijab. But hijab is like, are we going to take the Sikh boys? Are we going to say that aap turban nahi pehenenge? It's a narrow subject. It's a cultural subject. It's nothing. It's not it's not supposed to be about rules and administration and constitution. It's cultural, and we could have a separate session. Our country, our history has so many fault lines, and we have to find solutions, negotiate solutions around that. But I think those are the kind of things I hope companies, HR professionals develop an enlightened and a much inclusive mindset about these things, and not get hijacked by the narrow framing. See, Mr. Bush was, I'm sorry to name him, but remember after 9/11, Bush said you're either with us or against us. There is no neutral ground. And he is most respected Secretary of State, that is the Foreign Minister, who was a decorated Army General, Colin Powell. They said that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapons. They lied to the United Nations. And in 2004, by then, they had already confessed. Mr. Colin Powell said, sorry, we lied. Anyway, so this is not a session about Bush, but I'm just saying, so let's not be victims or prisoners or hostage to narrow debates. These are complex cultural issues. I saw some videos where even teachers had to remove the hijab and their entire, which is their traditional attire, before entering the gate of a school. It's almost like seeing somebody undress, It's really, it was very disturbing, I think.
Right.
But that's what it's come to.
Okay. You gave me a great segue to broaden the discussion. And the place that I want to go to is, we spoke of economic trends and we spoke of multiple trends which will impact workplace. If I were to ask you to pick up 2 trends that you believe will truly define impact on corporate workplaces over the next year and a half, what would that look like?
One is easy, Swati, digital. You got to be digital. Doesn't matter whether you're in manufacturing or in any sector, whether you're in retail, hospitality, medical, tourism. Digital is digital. Just to give a very micro example of this, suppose I'm a Kirana store, okay, a small organization, but I still need to file taxes. I still need to have pay my salaries. I still need to maintain accounts. I still need to give receipts. So nobody thinks of Kirana store adopting ERP solutions, right? You can't go to what is it called? SAP or something. Of course not. But guess what? There are now off-the-shelf customized ERP solutions for micro entrepreneurs which reside in the cloud. I mean, we are all in the age of Google Pay, right? We pay your UPI. So everything, so the entire end-to-end ERP solution appropriate for a Kirana store is available, and it's in the cloud, and it's affordable. That's an example of how to go digital. If you're not going digital, you're going to be left behind. Digital is one trend for sure. And the second trend, I think, is renewable, but that's a smaller trend. I don't think it's a mega trend, but is to kind of try and climb the bandwagon of renewable. I mean, climate change in general. So it's renewable energy or it's products which are more sustainable. You know, people preferring. There are three different groups, three different West interests which are now putting pressure. There are large investors like mutual funds. The biggest mutual fund in the world is a company called BlackRock. The chairman of BlackRock said we are going to start investing in companies who have a green agenda or who are more, environmentally conscious or responsible. Then there is pressure from customers who want to buy green products. I'm sure when you go to buy a fridge, Swati, you first thing we look at is not the price but the 5-star rating and that happened long time ago. And the third set of pressure is coming from even young people looking for jobs. They don't want to work for companies which are in dirty industries or don't have a solid credentials in social and environment. So I think that's the second trend.
Thank you for sharing that. And if I were to ask you, Singh, how do you see, and I'm bringing this back specific to our profession in human resources, is, when we look at these kind of trends, and what's the best way that you would inform our profession to say, here's how you keep yourself really, really updated on global trends, on local trends. Here's how you draw insight from those trends into your day-to-day work. And I'm appealing to the teacher in you to help us with that.
You're asking me to become an HR professional. No, I think the continuous education. So simple thing, have a fortnightly series, if not fortnightly, at least monthly, where you invite a speaker from outside and make sure all your HR professionals attend the talk. Make it an interactive, latest trend, contemporary trends, macro trends, technology trends. So that's one simple, easy to, every second Thursday, 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. you have to reserve for that. Then sending people to, again, training programs. I think generally corporate India tends to underinvest in training. I'm talking about at all levels, not only senior people. So senior most people get to go to Harvard and do AMPs, but I don't mean them. Actually, they are not the problem. The problem is mid-level or lower level. And that's because I think when you invest in your people in training, that's a cost. And then the market value of that person increases and the risk that the person may just leave and get a better job. So instinctively, corporate India tends to underinvest. So I'm not making a charge against all of them. I'm just saying this is a potential tendency. But collectively, I think the HR professionals should all agree that the level of investment in training and skilling, in a continuous education, I call it, should be higher. And then also, I guess, encourage the young teaching the old. See, with knowledge, especially in this IT age, knowledge passes from the young to the old, not the other way. I mean, just to give you a trivial example, that many companies have this policy that if you want a laptop, there is a company laptop policy. Okay, so only the senior most people get the fully loaded 500 GB and laptop. Then there's a second tier, and the juniors get a laptop which is like 30,000 rupees and just barely has 8 GB memory. It should be ulta, baba. It should be the junior most guys should get the most sophisticated laptops.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. I am going to, ask you if there are any parting thoughts that you would like to share with this group. We've really enjoyed having you here today. I think the audience has been super engaged. I mean, there's a flood of responses constantly. I think we've really appreciated having you here. But I'd really like to hear from you any parting thoughts before we close.
No, thank you. I mean, I'm very happy and privileged to have been invited. Very, very wonderful to interact with you, Swati, and all the very best to you and your colleagues and the conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ipshit, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Ajit Ranade, for offering a lot of interesting perspectives on geopolitical and socio-economic trends and connecting them to the importance of having a diverse and inclusive workplace. Thank you, Ms. Swati, for helping us understand the meta picture and engaging Dr. Ranade and participants in this wonderful and enlightening session. Thank you, participants, for your enthusiastic participation. We are now moving into a break, and the next session will begin at 11:15. Thank you.
Thank you.